Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Beneath the Surface. Today we'll be discussing war. What is the purpose of war when every nation is calling out for peace? And surprisingly enough, the British government states war is essentially an evil thing. To initiate a war of aggression, therefore, is not only an international crime, it is a supreme international crime, differing only from the other war crimes in that it contains within itself accumulated evil of the whole. Joining us on Beneath the Surface is Chris Coverdale, a lawyer and tax resister. Thank you very much for joining us today. Let's start off with, what's your opinion on war?
War is probably the most evil human activity. As the judges at Nuremberg said, it is evil, and anyone who starts a war is committing the worst crime known to mankind. So,
when do you think it's right to declare war on a country?
It's never right to declare war. It never has been since 1928. In 1928, the world, after the First World War, the horror of the First World War, the world signed the Treaty for the Renunciation of War, called the Coverdale Pact. That was in 1928, and we agreed with 19 other states never to wage war and to settle all disputes peacefully. By 1939, 63 nations, all the major nations of the world, had signed up to that. And then in 1939, Germany breached it. The interesting thing about that law is that at the Nuremberg war crimes trials in 1946, after the Second World War, Germany's leaders were tried, and many of them were convicted of 11 breaches of the Coverdale Pact when they intervened in other nations' affairs and attacked them. They were breaching the Coverdale Pact, and what most people don't know is that that was the law at the time under which Germany's leaders were convicted, and many of them were hanged. It's the same law is still in place today, and when Bush and Blair went into Iraq in 2003 or into Afghanistan in 2001, they broke that law. And they committed the same crimes that Germany's leaders committed in 1939.
Why hasn't any conviction taken place against these two figures, politicians?
Well, that's a very complicated question to answer. However, I'll try and give you a brief answer on it. Firstly, people don't know the law. And our governments are committed, the British and American governments and Israeli governments in particular, have been ignoring international war law since it was set and agreed. And because very few people in this country ever know the law itself, then they don't know how to hold our leaders to account. And if a leader is never held to account when they start a war, then they do it again and again and again. And so at some point we have to persuade the population to hold our leaders to account. So we really must prosecute, try and convict Tony Blair and Gordon Brown and David Cameron and any other British leader who takes us into an illegal war. If that happened, we'd never fight wars.
Recently there was an actual poll for many countries, because the whole world keeps calling out for peace and everyone wants peace, but sadly peace has never actually been seen for a very long time. And they did a poll where it was only Israel, America and the United Kingdom, as you mentioned. They're the only countries that didn't agree with peace, and they felt there was a necessary need for war. Why do you think that is?
That's worthy of an entire programme, but I'll try and answer it. I think our difficulty is that we're called a democracy, but in fact there's nothing democratic about Britain or America or Israel We are run as an oligarchy. Just a few people make all the decisions and everybody else goes along with them. So you get a few people determined to make war, and they take the whole nation to war over and over again. They make huge amounts of money out of it, and there are behind the scenes bankers and others who are determined to keep war going because they make huge amounts of money out of it and they get more and more and more control. So that's basically why we are fighting wars.
But is there a way that us people, because we do protest, we go out there into London, around the Parliament and everything, trying to say no to war, and because nobody likes war. If it was, other civilians being killed across the world, or just your own, soldiers back in London, in Britain, it's not a nice thing because, everyone's being killed for no actual purpose in a way.
Absolutely.
What more can we do? How can we kind of put this conviction, as you said? How can we go about that?
This is a very important question. I think the first thing is that we must not put so much faith in protests, demonstrations and marches. We've been marching, demonstrating, protesting against war in Britain since the 1950s. There were big marches with the campaign for nuclear disarmament, and there was a massive march in 2003, and more than 1 million people protested at it, but the government paid absolutely no attention at all. And that is always the case. They like these marches and demonstrations because it makes the people feel they're doing something to stop war, but they know they're not going to pay any attention to it at all and carry on fighting.
But recently, it was mainly last year, with the situation in Syria, where the UK and the US wanted to go in, however, the MPs, mainly because apparently of the protests that were taking place, they decided they don't want to do that. Was that actually genuine? Did they stop because of the marching or because they were sick and tired of what was taking place?
I think it was the warmongers had not reckoned on and had not at that time influenced David Miliband, who was the head of the Labour Party. Since then, he has gone back to fighting any war and supporting any war at all. But last year, he, talking to members of his party, people didn't want war, and that probably came about a bit because of the demonstrations. The party then decided that they would vote against Cameron's motion in Parliament last year, and that's what happened. And that was a surprise to the Americans who were sponsoring these wars, and it took them by surprise, and so they didn't really know what to do, but they have got round it, and now we're starting to bomb Iraq again, and they'll soon be getting the Brits to bomb Syria, or trying to anyway.
Do you think that because the US and the UK last year didn't actually go into Syria, the group ISIS, because the group ISIS, many people don't even know who they are, and there are many theories of who they are. Do you think that ISIS actually went into Iraq to find another reason or purpose, let's say, for the UK and the US to invade Iraq again? Absolutely.
I think from what I know, ISIS has been funded and organised by America and Britain. I was horrified to discover last year, for instance, that out of our international aid fund from Department for International Development, last year we funded groups in Syria, which is probably ISIS, to the tune of just under £100 million, and we refused to name them for security reasons. Now that can only be because it was ISIS, and we were funding it last year from our development budget, and then now we're attacking them. It's a false flag operation, just like all the other false flag operations that have taken us to war in the last 15, 20 years.
But living in London myself and knowing how the education, it's become very difficult in the sense that, a student has to pay triple the amount they used to pay a few years back. other than that, the libraries and the centres have been closed down. The NHS has just gone downhill in the sense that you have to wait over 8 hours until you're seen or may be seen by a doctor. To hear that £100 million was given to a group which now is attacking not only citizens in Iraq but also in Syria and other places, and which hurts even more that the UK is actually going to go and invade to remove them. Like, can't we actually do anything about this? Because It's not just the money that they're using. We're actually kind of like helping them with our taxes in a way.
Yes. I think what you're doing is a good start. It's very important that the British people know what's really happening. Now, we have very corrupt media in this country. The corruption in Britain is at a record level in every department, and the BBC chooses very carefully what news to get out there and what not to report. And so organisations like yours and others need to get the truth out there. And the more we start to understand the truth and how Britain is stirring up these wars, paying for it, and as you say, denying the money from the National Health Service and education and everything else in order to fund war overseas, it's when people really start to get understanding about that, then we can do something about it. And we need to talk about what we can do about it later, but broadly get the information out there so that people know what the real situation is and how we are being deceived by our government.
But with the social media today, in this day and age, like on WhatsApp, for example, Twitter, all of this information is going around. Like with the whole group of ISIS, as I said, there are many theories about them. Some people believe that ISIS actually stands for the Israeli Security Service, intelligence service. So there are many different theories about it, and nobody's actually, knowing the full truth of who they are and how they are funded. But we do know they're not their own group, they're not their own Islamic, let's say, as they call themselves, state, because they are funded by more than one party. But as this is being spread around, what more can we actually do in order for the British public or people around the world to understand what's actually taking place?
I don't know. I think there are lots of things that we can do. And one of the things that I've been trying to do is to get these issues into court. One of the best ways of investigating the truth is to have a big, large court case. And for the last 12 and a half years, our justice system has worked determinedly to ensure that no case associated with war ever gets into the courts. And so there have been more than certainly 1 billion war crimes committed by British citizens since 2001, and not one of those is ever prosecuted in court, because if it ever was, all the facts would come out and the corrupt, incompetent, inept way in which the British government has been operating would come to the fore, and people would have the facts. But we have to somehow get them out there. We need to show people just how bad the corruption is in Parliament, for instance, and in the Cabinet Office, in the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, in the Attorney General's Department, in the Ministry of Defence. There is huge corruption that is keeping these wars going against the interests of the British people and the rest of the world, and it needs to come out.
The problem is, like, when it comes to voting and electing a parliament, we've always got the ones that are saying that they're not going to be going out for war and they want the interests of their own citizens. However, we don't actually see that ever taking place. Labour Party was for like an odd 10 years in Parliament, and then we changed to Conservative Party, and it's practically the same, if not worse,
yes,
with wars. What more can we do in order for wars not to take place by the British government?
I think it's very important not to trust any British politician. I've never yet... Well, no, it's not quite true. There are one or two politicians in Parliament, John McDonnell, Jeremy Corbyn, and one or two others, who are doing their best to try and get these things out. But the majority, 640 of the 650, I would say, are corrupt and really, not necessarily, most of them are incompetent, I would say, rather than deliberately corrupt. But they know perfectly well that it is a crime of murder to drop a bomb on somebody and kill them. They know that if you go into another country and you attack its citizens, the nationals of that country, and you kill them as part of a state policy, that is genocide. And we have been doing this over and over again. And we need to get these facts about the law clearly understood by both the voters and the voted, in other words, the MPs. And when we start to do that, when we start to get some genuine accountability so that our MPs don't just give us all these promises and then break them and then get away with it. This is what happens every time. They break every promise they've made when they get into power, but nobody holds them to account for it. Now, we need to hold them to account, not only in the voting booth, but in court, because they are committing the worst crimes known to mankind. So, for instance, last Friday, this vote to bomb Iraq again, totally illegal. They all know perfectly well that dropping bombs on anyone is a criminal offence. And what will happen is that when the first time a British plane drops a bomb in Iraq and kills Iraqi citizens, whoever they are, whether they are Syrians or Iraqis, but there will be Iraqis killed, that is a criminal offence because they are Iraqis living in Iraq, doing nothing to us at all, killing them rather than taking them to court if they've committed an offence, is a criminal offence of genocide. It is a war crime, a crime against humanity, genocide, murder, and a crime against peace. And those 5 crimes are being committed every day by the British government. We must hold them to account in court.
With the situation in Iraq, many people, especially the Iraqi citizens, are against ISIS, of course, and wouldn't mind, in a sense, for them to be bombed or removed. It doesn't have to be bombed because, as you said, there are many other ways we can go about it. However, the problem that Iraq faced recently was the US apparently accidentally bombed the Iraqi citizens themselves, and they gave weapons accidentally also to ISIS. What's actually going on? Like, they keep using the word accidentally, hoping that the Iraqi citizens wouldn't mind what's actually taking place.
I mean, none of it is accidental. It's all planned and pre-planned. And the idea of taking over Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and all the others was first formulated in America in the 1990s, and they've been pursuing that ever since. There is a small group of people behind the American administration who are determined to ensure that America runs the world. And they're doing their best. Now, what happens is that Obama comes in, he makes various promises. When he gets into power, he immediately reverses them all. Now, I think the reason for that is that there are a small group of really very unpleasant, nasty people, psychopaths mainly, behind the scenes, who threaten our leaders and say, look, unless you go our way, your family, your kids, they'll all be murdered. We'll make sure they disappear. They get blown up, there's an accident or whatever, unless you do what we say. And so it's very easy to actually influence the way the world runs if you get into that sort of position. That's what happened in Britain, for instance, with Tony Blair. When we had the 7/7 bombings, and it was blamed on 4 Muslims, that's absolute rubbish. I mean, we now know there's certain proof that those Muslims didn't do it. The 4 accused had supposedly got onto a train, for instance, from Luton before the bombings in London. it was found out afterwards that that train was cancelled. They could not have got to London to do the bombing. The fact that all the television, closed-circuit television at all the relevant stations accidentally wasn't working that day. The fact that there was an exercise going on at the same time, organised by the police, of a supposed bombing on 3 tube trains and 1 bus, and it turned out exactly as it had been planned. All of that was not taken into account, and we, unfortunately, the British people are very gullible. We believe what we are told. And so this is happening all around the world all the time, particularly with America and Britain. And I think Israel is behind it, personally.
Why do you think they want to run the world? Like, what do they benefit exactly from running the world?
They make lots of money out of it.
But are they not making already a lot of money? Because most of the countries around the world do follow or are allies of the US and the UK and even Israel. So what more do they actually want?
Well, it's difficult to tell, but somebody who has everything always wants more. And these people are really, they've been doing it for a very long time. I think if you want to find out more about it, look into the New World Order and what's going on there, and get some people to research the reality behind it. I don't know an awful lot about it myself, but there will be people who can tell you an awful lot about it. So the reason why this is going on is very important. And what we can do about it is to take action ourselves, and that's a different area, and perhaps that's the sort of thing that we can move on to.
You mentioned the 7/7 bombings and how apparently the 4 Muslims that were accused of the bombings didn't actually commit the crime themselves. There's that aspect of it, and there's also of the 9/11. There's a lot of footage and a lot of documentaries recently coming out showing that the planes didn't actually hit the buildings. It was just more of something that was blown up and gone to the ground. Yes. However, these things are still being taught at school. Like recently, my sister was talking to me about how the Al-Qaeda is a very bad organization and how they've done a lot of terrorist acts. And she also mentioned that a person in the class said that, no, it was actually done by America and the teacher actually put him into detention. If that's the case, that the school itself, is not giving the chance for a child to say what they've got to say, or even to teaching them that these actual things did take place by these certain individuals, do you think that's a step forward? What more can we do to show the truth or say the truth?
I think it's to do what you're doing, which is to make television programs which show clearly what happened and the facts. And there are some very good programs out there about the 7/7 bombings, for instance. There's the ripple effect. I don't know if you've seen that, but it's worthwhile your viewers having a look at the ripple effect. And that goes into the facts behind the 7/7 bombings. It's a very good film. There's another one called Farrell and Colostrum Are Dead. And they go into it as well. And the more we get the information out there, the less likelihood there will be of the teachers following the party line when they can see for themselves that that child was telling the truth. And they can see it on video. And the child can say, well, look, please have a look at this. Then there'll be less of that appalling behaviour which goes on.
Hopefully there would be less of that behaviour. But the problem we have is some people say that when the UK and the US go into other countries and kill the citizens, those other citizens are not as important as a British citizen themselves.
I know.
But if, as the UK government itself, the British government is implementing this bombs and this whole attack, are they not thinking of the British citizens? Have they put them to a side? What's their motive behind it?
Motive. I think it's a very difficult area here. One of the things about societies is that they are governed by procedures and rules and systems rather than by personal, individual, motivated behavior. So if somebody has a job as a bomb dropper in an aeroplane, they just do their job and they drop the bombs when they're told to do it. And now that applies right through the system, so that the Prime Minister or the cabinet members will do what the Prime Minister tells them to do. The Queen, for instance, we have a real problem there because she is head of the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces. And when she came to power in 1953, she swore on oath to uphold the law, customs and statutes of Parliament. And in relation to the laws of war, she hasn't upheld the law once in 60 years. No, it's not quite true. I mean, but there's been at least 17 illegal wars in which 8 million people have died, between 8 and 12 million, and very often 30% of them will be children. Now, it is horrendous that our leaders can say, all right, well, we'll sign off to another war. She has to sign off to the fact that we're going to bomb Iraq because the armed forces only take their orders from her.
So she actually would sign off for the war. That's how the process goes.
That's part of the process, yes. I mean, but she is the Commander-in-Chief. So what happens is the Privy Council put an order in front of her and she signs it. Now, one thing she could do, and it would be really nice if she did, is to say, no, I'm not going to sign this until you prove to me that it's lawful.
Isn't that something she's meant to do, though?
It is, certainly, but she doesn't do it because her advisors, she's surrounded by advisors who are corrupt and will say, yes, come on, sign it. We need it signed now. And so she does. But every war, you look back into history, when we invaded Egypt in 1956, it was totally illegal. And the deaths of 1,800 Egyptians, that was a criminal offence of genocide at the time. War crimes, crimes against humanity, all of which had been agreed immediately after the war, and a crime against peace.
So all of these wars are committed just for political power and money?
Yes, and unfortunately we have a system that enables half a dozen people to take us to war. If we were a true democracy and the people took the decisions, then the decision of going to war would be taken by the people, and presumably most of them would say, no, of course not, we don't want to go to war. Now that's the situation in Switzerland, for instance. They haven't had an external war in 860 years.
It's a very long time.
That's a very long time.
That's a very good thing. Can't Britain actually be influenced by Switzerland?
I wish they could. I mean, if we had a system like Switzerland of communes and cantons having the power and not the central government, then we wouldn't go to war. So we need to change our system in this country, which is outdated. It's based on 17th, 18th, 19th century material, and it's totally out of date in the 21st century.
The funny thing is that the UK, the British government goes to other countries like in the Middle East and third world countries and saying how they have to bring democracy. And as you said that we don't actually have democracy, isn't there more things that we can do in order to bring democracy to the UK?
Yes, and I think the single simplest thing that will bring democracy to the UK is every individual is what I would call as a tax rebellion. It is withholding tax from the government. Now, the one power every individual has over the government is to refuse to give them the money to pay for war. Now, if we ensure that around the country everybody says, no more tax, I refuse to pay it, and I will only pay it when you operate lawfully. It's very interesting that last year a thing happened in the Supreme Court where for the first time ever the Supreme Court ruled that the military activities of the British government overseas are terrorism. It's a very interesting quote. Shall I read it out to you?
Of course, please.
This is what the Supreme Court said about just under a year ago, when they were ruling on the definition of terrorism. As a matter of ordinary language, the definition would seem to cover any violence or damage to property if it is carried out to advance a very wide range of causes. Thus, it would appear to extend to military or quasi-military activity aimed at bringing down a foreign government, even where that activity is approved, officially or unofficially, by the UK government. Now that's a very important statement, because what it means is that they have agreed that all the wars that we've fought since the law on terrorism came in 2000 actually qualify as criminal offences and crimes and illegal. So basically the Supreme Court has said that the military activities of the British government in Afghanistan, Iraq and so on are illegal. We now have a duty to refuse to pay tax to the British government, because if we do so, we commit a crime under the same legislation. We are aiding and abetting crimes of terrorism.
But when you first say not paying our taxes, the first thing I think of is we're going to be getting a big fine and we're going to be in deep trouble for not paying our taxes. So how can we actually go about this to the extent that the majority of people don't pay their tax, so we're not in a lot of trouble? Because, you know, there's a lot of the credit risk as well that people are going to be taking.
Yes, I mean, it is very important. I haven't actually paid any tax, or I've tried not to pay tax since 2002, and because I know it's a criminal offence to do so. But it's actually much easier than it seems. The important bit is to have not just one person like me stopping it. I'm still out of prison, only just, but I am still out of prison, because I know that it is a criminal offence if I hand over the money. If we get 10,000 people doing it, then the government has to pay attention. 10,000 people, they can't arrest all of us. And if we do it for things like VAT, so every time you buy a cup of coffee or whatever it is, you pay 20% VAT. Now, next time you go into a restaurant or whatever and buy some coffee and you get a bill, deduct the VAT and sign off a bit of paper saying, I'm deducting this because it's a criminal offence. I'm paying you for the coffee. It was a very nice cup of coffee, but I'm not going to pay the VAT. They can send that back to the Revenue and Customs at the end of the month, along with all the others. And the Revenue and Customs will then have to say, now, are we going to charge this person with not paying 40 pence VAT, or 80 pence, or £2, whatever it is? It's just not worth their while to charge all those people for refusing to pay VAT. If it's only one or two of us, then they may well come down on us. But if there's lots of us, then we can do it.
When you're in the restaurant, would you actually be able to leave if, you know, would the staff allow you to leave if you haven't paid the full amount?
Well, I'll show you, I'll give you some forms. It's very simple. The issue is that it is a criminal offence to pay VAT, and all you're doing is saying, I bought the meal or the coffee or whatever it is, and I've paid you for that. All I'm refusing to do is to pay the tax. And if you force me to pay the tax, you are committing a criminal offence as well. Is it worth it for 80 pence? Because I can report you to the police just as much as you can report me to the police for not paying. And I will report you under Section 15 of the Terrorism Act for contributing to the purposes of terrorism in Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, wherever. So we have to actually start reversing we assume as a people that we have to pay tax. But the important bit is to realise that that assumption was broken when, for the first time in in history, I think, the payment of tax was made illegal in this country when they introduced the Terrorism Act 2000.
So
if the money is used by the government for purposes of terrorism.
Because being a taxpayer, I don't mind paying for, National Health Service, schooling, teachers, anything else. But when it comes to war, that's a very big thing that goes against every humankind, really, because you're just killing other fellow humans for no purpose. But is there something that we can do where for a month, for example, we make an awareness not to pay any taxes and see what happens? Absolutely, and there are lots of things we can do exactly down that line. The important thing to remember is only pay tax for lawful purposes. But the thing is, when we're paying our tax, we don't know exactly where that amount of money is going to. Exactly. That's the problem. So we have to, and what happens is it all goes into the government's pot, whether it's council tax, VAT, income tax, corporation tax, whatever, it all goes into one pot, which the government then decides we're going to spend it in the following way. So it's either all or nothing. So we have to stop paying tax, as you suggest, for a month. And if everybody stopped for a month, the war would stop, and we could immediately say, now, the money we have stopped, we only want it to go for lawful purposes. And it's quite easy to set up a trust, for instance, which will take your money and everybody else's and say, we will only pay that money out of the trust to the lawful purposes for which our citizens have put it into the trust. And if you say you want that money to go to the National Health Service and to education and to social purposes, whatever, then the trustees have to then make sure their money goes for that purpose. There is a new way where they've done that when you've got a certain amount of income, of course, that you can give your taxes to a charity. Isn't that something we should all be able to, regardless of how much your income is? Yes, but remember, that is a tax scam. What they're saying is that you give the money to the charity and the tax that you have already paid will be paid direct from the government to the charity on your behalf. So it's again, you've got to be careful. The important bit is to make sure the money does not go to the government so that it can be used to murder innocent people, men, women and children in Afghanistan, Iraq, wherever. What concerns me is that people say, okay, well, I'd like to give up paying tax. I'm nervous, anxious about it. I think I might be arrested and so on. And I'm saying, well, first of all, you won't get arrested, particularly if it's small amounts. It takes a long time to go through the process of taking you to court. It took them 6 years before they finally got me into court. And any time down that 6 years, I could have changed my mind and said, all right, you can have the money. But if one can find a way of making sure that the money stops and doesn't get to the government, makes it easy for people, then people find it less difficult to stop it. They're not so anxious about it. So if you have a group of people in Birmingham or wherever, say, okay, we're all together going to start to take a 1 month tax break. We're going to withhold all our taxes for 1 month. And we are deliberately doing it because we know it to be a criminal offence. And if anybody charges us with a criminal offence of not paying, we will charge them with a criminal offence of paying. And we have to start taking the offensive as a people. And I think we have a perfect opportunity. Never before have we had such a golden opportunity to stop war. The Supreme Court made a mistake by ruling on that terrorism is a criminal offence. And we need to take advantage of that mistake. The justice system in this country has been so corrupt that they have managed to keep everything out of court all this time. That's why Tony Blair never gets into court. Everybody knows that he committed the worst crimes known to mankind. But he is protected by
senior people in the justice system, senior people in politics, in government, in the civil service, wherever. And one day we the people will win through, and we'll be able to get him and all his colleagues into court, charged with war crimes, crimes against humanity, genocide, crimes against peace, and murder. And those 5 crimes, the most serious crimes known to mankind, they will, if we could just get half a dozen of our people into court, that will stop war forever.
Really hope so, because the amount of people that are being killed, murdered and slaughtered for, which hurts, it's just for political purposes. It's not even for an actual cause, because some people may think that a war is a solution, for example, but in this situation it's not at all. Everything is, you know, it's just taking place for no purpose.
Yes.
And sadly we're going to have to end the program today. Thank you very much for joining us, and thank you very much for watching Beneath the Surface.